So welcome everyone to the A+ strength-based feedback micro progression action class with Kemi Joseph and Alejandro Rodriguez. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you all, especially this is our last public training for the year. And so we were celebrating quite a bit. And thank y'all for being here. You're hearing my voice. I want to invite Alejandro to share a little bit about himself as well. So that way we can jump right into today's session. Go for it, Alejandro.
Hello, you all, and welcome to this action class. I'm so grateful to be here and looking forward to what we're going to share with each other. My name is Alejandro Rodriguez. I use he, him pronouns. Most folks call me Ale. And I am the founder and director of Alejo Communication, and we are developing a really exciting partnership with Fears Advantage. We're a training and coaching and consulting company focused on inclusive communication in multicultural workplaces. And in particular, I have a performance background, and we really thrive. We talk about rehearsing the performance of leadership. So we have actors around the country who function as practice partners, really getting practical with these difficult conversations, feedback, conflict resolution, interview skills, any sort of conversation that is high stakes that you want to get right. Alejo Communications will help you practice. I wanted to say hi up front. You'll hear some more from me, but I also have to slip away in about the 30-minute mark for another engagement that came up at the last minute. So I wanted to say hello. I'm going to be watching this recording on the back end, but I'm really thrilled to be here, and I can't wait to contribute.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. So you know that he's one, skilled and also very popular. That's why he's like, hey, I'm here and then I'm gone. But we wanted to make sure y'all know. So you'll see Alejandro pop up again in a moment. Thank you so much, Alejandro. And I'd love for you to give some people some love in the chat, Alejandro, as you're seeing what they shared. Some very powerful shares in terms of what y'all came here to receive. And I wanted to make sure, I think part of feedback is also checking in to see that we have alignment with what you came here for. So most of what's here in the chat is absolutely going to be covered. And I'm excited to check in with y'all who stay the whole time to make sure that you receive these things in the chat, as well as hopefully you got even more than you expected. And so with that, we say welcome into the training. My name is Kemi Joseph, and I'm CEO of Fears Advantage, which stands for Fuel Equitable Actions, Relationships, and Systems. We take a very systematic approach to being able to tackle things that are difficult, like giving feedback. Instead of letting that fear fuel separation and avoidance, we want to fuel equitable actions, relationships, and systems. We are on a mission to help 5 million leaders advance equity in their organizations by 2030. So thank you very much for being a part of that journey, especially that you can take these resources back and be the leaders who can give feedback and move people forward, especially as we create more environments where every employee can work safely and thrive. Part of our larger vision of creating a world where every human being can live safely and thrive. So welcome in to a powerful journey. I'm excited because this class, we've been doing a lot of trainings on bias, and those classes get pretty intense. So a class on feedback seems way more enjoyable to me. So you're going to see me smiling and really having a good time. And I encourage y'all to let yourself have a good time as well. So please type the word yay, yay in the chat. If you're interested in having a good time as we talk about feedback, type the word yay, yay in the chat. And as we jump back into here, whenever we are sharing our work in the world, we generally separate it into these categories as well. Today, we're diving into the action portion, and this is giving you a semblance of our action classes. And generally, when we're talking about our action classes, we're helping people shift from microaggressions to micro progressions, including microaggressions and spelling them correctly, to then make sure we got the correct spelling micro progressions. And these are the low burden, high impact ways that we can make a positive impact in our organization. And so our trainings, we generally call them action classes because we are focused on what actions need to be taken in order to move things forward. Today, this action class, so this is a condensed version of our action class on A+ strength-based feedback. So when I say condensed, We usually do a 3-hour live session, and practice labs, you're getting a 90-minute version, technically an hour version with a 30-minute practice lab. So just know that you're getting a condensed version. We want to be able to provide you with resources, especially as people are doing things like end of the year performance reviews and making sure that they can give their team the feedback that helps to fuel them forward in this last portion of the year. And with that, we want to give you an additional gift of a workbook that you can use to take away some great insights in here. So I will ask our team to put it here in the chat. I think I see Brian's going for it. I will help you out too, Brian. And Brian is providing our tech support. Brian will be a part of this conversation later on as well. So please make sure you go ahead and grab this workbook. It has a couple of sheets that can guide you along the journey. So do me a favor, type in the chat, got it, if you were able to click that link and open yourself your workbook. All right, got a lot of got it. You can also say don't got it if there's some kind of issue, and Brian can help you out as well. So when we talk about A+ strength-based feedback, we're talking about a multi-tiered feedback that asset frames, aligns, and advances. This will become much more clear as we go through it, but I need you to think about this framework that our feedback asset frames, aligns, and advances. And some people, as you're reading through our emails and the sequences that we sent in advance, we talked about something called the feedback sandwich, where it's like, hey, we give a little bit of praise, probably a lot of criticism, and then some praise. And even if you get a double feedback sandwich, I'm like, oh man, it's double the patties. It does not help. I shouldn't say it doesn't help. I will say that in a world where we have so many different burger chains and people cannot even agree on what's the best burger, we cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach to giving feedback. And the difference for us here is that the feedback sandwich is a formula that has people really being sometimes inauthentic in how we give the feedback, compared to we want to be able to offer you a framework that says, let's make the feedback more organic and really make it powerful and palpable so people can be nourished by that. So we know that frameworks make the brain work. So please pay attention to what part of this framework helps your brain work and actually go towards feedback as opposed to going away from feedback. And something that Alejandro shares quite a bit when he does his talks as well is talking about the difference between feeding back and feeding forward. Where a lot of times as we were servicing our clients, we're feeding forward. We're making sure that we're doing everything we can to give information to our clients, to take care of our teams, to really provide any goods and services. And so in order to feed forward, we actually have to feed back and have more of a balance. It's like having oars that allow your team to more progressively move forward, learn, move forward, adapt, move forward, learn, and continue to build that resilience as opposed to just doing one or the other. So I would tell you right now at the top, just having biannual or every 6 months having feedback or performance reviews is oftentimes not enough. If you think about all the feeding forward that your team is doing, they're not actually being given the feedback to move themselves forward inside of your organization. That leaves people generally at a deficit. That leaves people generally feeling like they don't know if they're doing a good job. So it's important that we can even take these micro opportunities to be giving people feedback and create a culture where feedback is appreciated, feedback is sought after, and feedback can be used to fuel more action forward. So type the word forward in the chat if you're with me. You can also use the emojis in Zoom at any point. If you want to say, oh yeah, we love this, then you can continue to track along with me with the emojis or in the chat there. So thank y'all very much. Now, when we're talking about strength-based feedback, again, it says kind of asset frames, aligns, and then advances. We are going to jump into this portion first and foremost around asset frames. Now, it's important that as we do this work together, we know that feedback can be difficult already. And I want to ask you, I want to give you this first invitation to make sure that this training can be as relevant to you as possible. Please take a moment, and you don't have to share this in the chat. This is why you have the workbook, to write out a couple pieces of feedback that you're struggling to deliver. Taking a moment to actually identify pieces of feedback that you're struggling to deliver. So that way we can make sure that as you go through this time together, that you can actually feel more comfortable giving that feedback that you're struggling to deliver. And as you can see this in your workbook, this would be on, give you the exact page number. You can actually find this on page 5, and you can actually see the top of that page 5 will give you an opportunity to put someone's name, the piece of feedback, and even give yourself a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, of something that might just feel uncomfortable to give versus something that might feel completely like an unavoidable conflict. As soon as I share this, I know there's going to be a fight on our hands. So I'll share with you the piece of feedback that I'm working on to give you an example of what it might sound like for you all. So I'm speaking to someone named Jimmy, and the feedback that I'm uncomfortable or struggling to deliver is saying something to the effect of, I felt you were totally unprepared for our last event, and I'm totally disappointed since I recommended you to the team or to the event, and then I'm at about a 7 for this. Now, some of the things that are impacting me in this is that this is a very real example, in the sense that there's somebody that I care about that I brought in to do one of our trainings together. And I just feel like they weren't on par with the kind of client experience that we want to create. And if you know me in presentations, I get very focused on those pieces. So there's a piece of feedback I want to give to this person who I really care about, and give it to them in a professional setting, that it's not just a personal conversation, it's more of a professional one now. So I would put that one as a more intense version of the feedback that I want to give. That's why I rated it a 7. I'd love to pause here and give anybody a chance to also share a little bit about a piece of feedback that they chose, and where did they rate that piece of feedback? Because I would ask y'all, as you see in an example, to choose something that might be, for example, somewhere between a 5 to a 7. That is not necessarily like a 10. If you think it's going to be an unavoidable conflict at a 10, that may not be a piece of feedback that you want to work on right now, because you might feel like no matter what I say, it's going to be a conflict. I think something for me around the 10 lets me know that, something for me around the 7 lets me know that it's going to be a little bit challenging, but I know that it's not going to be a full-on conflict if I approach it the right way. So anybody else want to share an example or also ask any questions or concerns about this before we move on?
I have an example. Hi, everybody. I'm Dakota. How's it going? I have an example. I have also a partner in which we had planned to meet with a very, very important high-end potential client. And she showed up disheveled. As far as the attire, her whole presentation. And as you all know, on the virtual meetings, you're on camera. So a lot of it is really emphasized because you're limited to what you're focusing on. Mm-hmm. So it was clear that she was disheveled. And I'm disappointed because this is not a last minute meeting. This is something we've been working toward for 3+ weeks. And so now the conversation to be able to broach the subject tenderly at the same time where we can come together in a place where we're both clear about how we perceive what happened, and also making sure that we walk away whole.
Oof, yeah, I appreciate that you're already thinking. Y'all can give Dakota some love there, and with the Zoom reactions, I appreciate, Dakota, that you're already thinking about how to broach it in that way. So let me ask you, on that scale of 1 to 10, where would you place that?
For my, I just want to be sure I want to answer that question correctly.
Yeah, if you're looking on the scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like, when you bring this up, it's going to be a conflict, and 1 is just like, this is a little bit uncomfortable, but I'll deal with it. Where would you put this on a scale of 1 to 10?
I think probably at a 6.
Okay, perfect. That's a great example. Something that's important to you, that you know that you're already thinking about, hey, we can walk away with a sense of wholeness, that we both can leave this thing more aligned. And I wanted to make sure I can ask you that question, because I see April in the chat says the thing I chose is a 9. April, you might want to back down, because if Dakota came in hot, you're like, this is, like I would be like, hey, maybe that's not the one you want to work on for this workshop, right? So just know, folks, picking something that you're willing to work on is going to be really helpful. So thank you for that example, Dakota, as you share something that is important, right? Something that just happened, something that needs to be addressed, and something that you're actually willing to think through in a way that's going to be supportive. And then you said walk away whole. So that's a great example of what the type of the piece of feedback we're asking you all to think about. So do me a favor, put in the chat, got it? If you got one that you're going to be applying. So I want to make sure that everything that we give you can actually be helpful. If there's too much negative energy, if there's too much frustration, if you already going through the conflict and you're already like setting an argument in motion, when you think about the situation, you might want to back off and pick one that's a little bit less intense. All right, great. Because then we're going to get into the work here. Thank you. So we're talking about strength-based feedbacks. We're going to jump into the first part of this, which is that it has to asset frame. That when we talk about feedback, the asset frames, the question that we have for you right now is, who is the protagonist of your feedback? Now, this is a question that I, even in asking this to myself, has become such a blessing, in the sense of sometimes I think as a leader, I'm the protagonist. I know I'm the protagonist of my life, but as a leader, if I think that I'm the protagonist of my feedback, I'm already setting myself and other person up for failure. Because sometimes if I think that I'm the protagonist of my feedback, then sometimes that means that they are the antagonist or they're the enemy. Or if I can see them as the protagonist of this piece of feedback, that means I'm looking to make sure that they're successful as well. That I'm looking to make sure whatever challenges we're dealing with together. And this is a very important piece, because even if we just look at asset frames, it's really important. And I know Alejandro is going to give us an example, because I want to be able to just share a clear definition here, that as we asset frame, we really are defining people by their contributions and aspirations. And that means that we lead, that we as leaders, we're leading with feedback, with the feedback receiver as the protagonist when we're addressing any challenges or problems that they're facing or that we're facing together. And this comes from Travian Shorter's from Be Me, because the flip side is that as our feedback deficit frames, we define people by their problems. It means that it encourages us to lead with our frustrations and their shortcomings, which generally makes the receiver a problem or an obstacle. So oftentimes we really resist feedback because we believe that people are seeing us in a deficit frame, or people are going to continue to critique us, and it creates a barrier. Now, this piece I want Alejandro to speak on as we help you bring this into real life.
Yeah, thank you, Kemi. And I'm so glad I got to be here to tee this section up, because for me, it was really radical. It's talking about the story that we're telling ourselves about this feedback. We're not yet talking about, anything in terms of what the feedback might be or how you deliver it. We're really talking about how you're perceiving this person and the feedback you're giving them. And I'm going to use myself as an example, because in building this class with Kemi, I looked back at some feedback that was quite difficult, that I think I would handle differently now. I used to be a director at a nonprofit, and we had, I remember bringing on a really enthusiastic new hire just out of college. And in the first several months of their employment, they were really going all out in meetings, right? And sharing a lot. And over the course of several of our staff meetings, I recognized that some of our team members were feeling like they were taking up too much bandwidth. This sort of, I can tell in their expressions, I kind of overheard grumbling. And I myself was feeling like, oh, well, I kind of started wishing that she'd take up less space, which is the narrative that started developing in my mind. I guess if I would have been asked at that point, I would have probably told you, let's call her Tatiana. I would have said, Tatiana, I like Tatiana, but she's green and she's over eager. She doesn't know her place in meetings yet. And unfortunately, it's keeping my team from being as productive in meetings as I want them to be, as I want us to be. Notice that narrative. Who's the protagonist of that? Me and my team, right? And of course, I'm going to get nervous to give that feedback, because all I'm telling myself in this internal narrative is, Tatiana is overeager. Tatiana doesn't know her place. She's keeping us and me from being as productive as I want to be. So as I'm working with Kemi on this, as I'm really digesting this asset framing, I invite you all to kind of jump out ahead of me, right? How think to yourself before I share my own shift. How could one shift that to make Tatiana the lead character, to really make it about what an asset she is? And it was Kemi who said, well, how about reconnecting with why you hired Tatiana? Go back to the moment that you were excited to bring her on board and you made her an offer to said, hey, join this organization, right? So as you all let your wheels turn around what shift that might be, I'll share where I got to in processing this content. I started thinking, okay, well, would it have been different to think Tatiana brings a unique and important perspective to our team? She's clearly invested. She comes with high energy and fresh ideas. And at times she's really enthusiastic to share those ideas. And there seems to be a misalignment surfacing in the team dynamic, right? I'm not hiding the fact that there's a misalignment, but now I'm suddenly eager to talk to Tatiana, who I've reframed as not only the hero of this story, but also via her strengths, via the reasons we brought her on board. I suddenly want to address this misalignment. And actually what it's done is it's kind of de-escalated the conversation for me, because I'm recognizing that she's the protagonist and I'm investing in her journey, right? So that's an example from my own learning with this of how we might shift the story we're telling ourselves around this feedback and take it from being about me to being about this person that we brought on board for a reason, probably for a good reason.
So thank you so much, Alejandro. I appreciate that. And people giving the snaps on that. And notice some of what Alejandro mentioned. I want to show you an example of what that might look like for me in this here is that I might still have the same piece of feedback, but the tension de-escalated from a 5 to a 7, just in me thinking about this person, like, oh yeah, why did I bring them on in the first place? It's wild that we can start with our team and hire them and think about all the great things they're going to bring. And then we start having issues and we're like, it's their fault. That's deficit framing. That's seeing them as a problem versus saying, I know this person's an asset. I know they have value before and after my feedback. So what we're going to challenge you to do right now, and this is challenged by choices. So I'm going to give you a couple different choices. I want you to rethink, as Alejandro mentioned, this is the part that kind of separates the feedback sandwich. Are we actually thinking in an asset framed mindset, or are we just pretending to be? I'm going to ask you to rethink the feedback you're struggling to deliver, and then use this asset frame type of approach and asking yourself these questions that are at the bottom here, and I'll restart the timer. So one is, what are the feedback receivers' contributions and aspirations? How does this information shift the way I lead them? How does leading with their contributions and aspirations de-escalate the discomfort of delivering my feedback? So I'm going to give you time to write your answers to these questions. Thank y'all for intentionally taking the time to write this. And I will let you know in terms of asking that question, who is the protagonist of my feedback? I've even been applying it to client conversations and really thinking in this world of DEI and all the work that we get to do, if I can remember that the clients I work with are the protagonists of their story and of their company, it takes the most difficult stuff and all the feedback that we have to share with them in terms of sharing assessment data and like look at it, then helping them to be successful with the data versus any shaming and blaming. So even if my feedback in this example hadn't changed yet, just me thinking about this person differently and leading with their contributions and their aspirations, the things that they want to achieve in the world, already inspires me to adjust how I communicate and to really be of value and of service to them. So I'd love to just take a moment for anyone who would like to unmute themselves and share any insights that came up as you wrote. I see some great ones here in the chat as well. Anybody else want to just unmute for a moment and share insights that came up as you were thinking through these prompts?
Hello, Kemi. This is Andy.
Hey, Andy.
Just to share real briefly, as you know, I just retired after 4+ decades in public accounting. And one of the things, and it was with a couple of different firms, one of the things is that we always had an evaluation process, but really never had any training on providing feedback. That was something that, you were supposed to sort of learn how to do through osmosis or some other means. And so when I think back about how I gave feedback to people, and I did understand the negative sandwich, and that was really helpful, that was provided earlier. But just the fact that I can almost relive some of the conversations I had and could figure out just through this brief period so far how I could reframe some things to make those interactions much more productive.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Andy. I'm interested to hear, even at a high level, when you think about that protagonist question, from those examples that you're rethinking, how often were you making the other people a protagonist?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it really depended upon the seriousness of the feedback, and the level of the level within the organization that you're providing the feedback to. That certainly had a lot to do with it. But giving feedback to others who are at fairly high levels in the organization can get really tricky. And that's where that's where I was thinking immediately how reframing some of this could have really been helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Andy. Thank you so much. And I think as you're talking about this idea of even some of the power dynamics, right? I think sometimes we like to, when there's a higher level power dynamic, we're like, oh yeah, let's make sure we give them like more positive, or like, let's really be mindful of that feedback. I'm like, to me, every person I influence, I want to be mindful of seeing them as a protagonist and making sure that we can give them the insights that help them be the heroes of their own journey. Right. So I appreciate you inviting that, Andy, and you already starting to think back about things you could have changed. And the piece you said earlier, we were supposed to do this by osmosis. We're in a world where people do not communicate well. We're expecting them to just be good at feedback. Like that's not my assumption. I'd rather assume that everybody can use some support and feedback. And I see now people are getting excited to share. I'll have y'all to save your hands for the next question, because we'll be progressively stopping. And that way we can get to the hour mark and provide all the content, and then we will have the discussion. So that's why I'm asking for one person at a time. I appreciate y'all for wanting to contribute, and we'll keep that going. So with that being said, this will close us out in the asset frames portion. We just want to give you one insight in each of these. Now, it's important that, as I said, this is more of a framework versus, hey, you have to do it in this exact order. But I will invite y'all to think about how your feedback actually aligns. Because for me, when I start to think about feedback that aligns, then it really helps me to shift away from a very clear conversation between misalignment and misconduct. I think sometimes people are looking at something as a misconduct when it's really a misalignment or a mistake. And I'd rather be able to give people the benefit of the doubt, the benefit of my trust, but that it really allows me to think about, how do we align? And I love what somebody said here in the chat earlier. It allows for more positive outcomes, more equitable outcomes from our perspective. With that being said, when we jump into the alliance portion, I want us to think about, how does our feedback align in 5 key areas? It's assuming that we're talking mostly about the workplace here. Look at the organizational values. How does our feedback align with our strengths as a feedback giver, as well as the feedback receiver strengths? The key behaviors that are needed, the critical behaviors that are needed to actually succeed in the project, the KPIs or the project success, as well as the challenges or problems that are actually in the way. I gave someone feedback yesterday about a presentation that they did, and they told me one of their greatest challenges has been the Zoom technology, for example. And they said, okay, I know that's been my greatest struggle, and we're working on that. We're hiring someone to take care of that. So I was like, okay, if that's one of their number one pieces here, if I spent our whole 30 minutes talking about just their Zoom issues, they would be like, I didn't get any helpful feedback because I already know that was the main problem. So I literally focused on aligning the feedback with everything else here, including, I let them know that in the first few minutes of their presentation, they made a joke that I believe was very exclusive, like that actually kind of split the room. And so I would love to invite you with this value. I know you have this value of inclusion. Can I invite you to align with the inclusion by making sure in those first few minutes of the meeting that you're asking questions that invite people that anybody can answer, that anybody can participate in. Like the question I asked earlier about what animal best represents your ability to receive, or your feeling, your mood when you can receive feedback and when you don't want to receive feedback. That's something that anybody can answer. Anyone can be a part of a conversation like this versus starting a question about something that's my favorite thing that may exclude everybody else in the room in the first few moments. So it's a very specific example. They're like, yeah, I can totally align with more inclusion and be able to move the conversation forward. So when we strive to essentially think about a checklist, where are we aligned and where are we misaligned? To just be able to offer to you, well, I'd love to share with you this misalignment framework. So sometimes it's like this, we're totally 100% misaligned. This ain't happening. It's not, we're literally going in opposite directions. Oftentimes we might have an example like this where we have misaligned implementation. So we're actually, we are aligned in the organization's values, we got the strengths, we have the behaviors, but we're not aligned on the success of the project, and we're not aligned about what the actual challenges are that we're facing. Sometimes we have misaligned leadership where we are clear about the project success, we're clear about the challenges, but we're not aligned with the organization's values, the strengths, or the key behaviors that are needed from both groups to actually move the conversation forward. Ideally, we're striving for 100% alignment, where you as the leader and the person who you're giving feedback are 100% aligned. Now, the reason we keep using this word aligned, because then we can start to shift and have this conversation about inviting realignment. Inviting realignment. So as the feedback giver, it'd be important that we're asking these questions. Where is there misalignment? Or where are we misaligned? That way we can focus on the gap that's between us that might even be preventing us from communicating or even preventing us from giving feedback that will close that gap. And when we actually prepare to discuss this with the feedback receiver, we can ask them a question, a scaling question. On a scale of 1 to 10, assuming 10 is fully aligned, how well are we aligned on blank? And you can say on the organization's values, how well are we aligned on our strengths here that can help us to move this forward? How well are we aligned on our behaviors, or how well are we aligned on what the success of this project is? How well are we aligned on the problems that we're facing that might prevent us from succeeding in this project? Whatever version, you can fill in that blank. And then asking them, how do we increase our alignment? How many of you have been asked this kind of question before as you're receiving feedback to actually help us improve our alignment, increase our alignment? Now, this is important for me because then it helps to, one, de-escalate the tension, but it lets them know I care about them, and that's why we're even having this conversation. So we can both succeed, but I'm starting with them as the protagonist to make sure I fully understand the narrative that they have about this as well. And if we ask a scaling question, we can actually see if I say a 5 and Brian says a 9, it's like, wait, are we already misaligned if we have different numbers, different answers to the question on the right? But now we have some wiggle room to discuss how do we get more aligned. So what I want you to do is, as you're thinking about your piece of feedback, I want you just answering the questions on the left. Where is there a misalignment? Or where are we misaligned? I'll give you 2 minutes to do this portion as well. And again, to those of you who've been eager to share, I'm going to give one person a time to share. So be ready for it. Those of you who are like, hey, I've been raising my hand. All right, after this next 2 minutes, I'm going to give you a chance to unmute yourself and share. So just be ready. We'll take one. All right, so let's do this. So I'll give you 2 minutes to answer this question. Where is there a misalignment? Thank y'all for riding along. For those of you who want to just share a one-liner in the chat, you can answer that question based on the feedback you're seeking to give. Which one of these areas is there misalignment? You can put that in the chat. All right, Lewis, I see your hands raised. Thank you for your patience there. And go ahead. So you're going to answer this question for your piece of feedback of where is there misalignment, or where are we misaligned? So Dora says here, there's misalignment in what different people see as a challenge or a problem. There are scenarios in which one person may thrive while another person may struggle. It requires empathy to communicate feedback given these differences and challenges and problems versus strengths? Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Dora, because there's sometimes people like thrive in stressful environments. Some people are like, no, I would prefer not to be in that stressful environment. And even if we're not even clear on that, it feels like what we start to do is blame other people or see them as a problem, right? This is why the asset framing becomes so key, because then we can say, okay, this person has value. This person has aspirations. This person has contributions. Let's make sure we start to align and get more clear on how we can succeed together, even if we have these differences. So I appreciate you sharing that, Dora. We're going to continue to move on to the next piece. Louis, you have to come back for the next round, buddy. So try so hard. And so we just want to make sure we have about 10 minutes left here in this portion. So I want to make sure that as we talk about A+ strength-based feedback that aligns, it's important that this helps us then return back to how do we asset frame our feedback. So earlier I shared this piece of feedback. Jimmy, I felt you were totally unprepared for our last event, and I'm totally disappointed since I recommended you. So if I'm going to be in this place of even asset frames and like aligning the feedback, I can say, Jimmy, I felt we were very misaligned for our last event together. And since I recommended you, I want to make sure we're more aligned for future events. Even in sharing that, I'm at a 4 compared to starting at a 7. I can give this fee. I can start the conversation this way, and now we can actually go to realignment, especially knowing that I want them to be a part of future events. And then this can make sure that we can have that scenario successfully together. Now, as we close out the portion on the asset frames and the lines, I want to focus on advances. We'll make sure that our A+ strength-based feedback advances people and organizations. And when we talk about advances, you have to know for us that we're always speaking from this perspective of making sure that employees can work safely and thrive. Now, generally, when we're speaking about work that advances, we're talking about going towards this thriving level and a systematic overhaul of organization. For today, we're focused on how do we advance safety to make sure that we can give you tools to advance safety in every one of your conversations. And the question I love, this is from Robert Greenleaf, he talks about servant leaders, is did you leave people better than you found them? If we're really talking about feedback, did we leave people better than we found them? If we cannot say that to be true, then again, we might be thinking about ourselves like, I'm such a great leader. I give amazing feedback. I knock people down and they build themselves back up. It's like, that doesn't necessarily mean I left them better than I found them. That means some people really have a connection to their resilience and they're going to bounce back no matter what I throw at them. That's not the same thing as for me being a leader that advances whoever is working with me and my team. So I want to make sure that every conversation, including one like this, that you leave better than we found you when we first began this. Just type the word better in the chat if we're leaving you a little bit better, even at this point in the training. Or if not, then you let me know what we got to do. But right now, we'll talk about safety filters. This is the piece that will close us out for the training as we talk about safety filters and really advancing safety in organization. A lot of times people do not feel safe receiving feedback. We generally measure safety in 4 areas of intellectual safety, emotional safety, psychological safety, and physical safety. And I'll give you just a brief definitions that you will have in your workbook as well. That physical safety is being free from danger of malicious physical harm or injury from any person or persons or objects in my work environment. Psychological safety, being able to show and be myself in a professional manner without fear of bias or discrimination about my identity, culture, belief, or life choices. Emotional safety, being able to openly and vulnerably share my emotions in a professional manner if I choose to do so without the threat of malicious harm. Finally, intellectual safety, being able to appropriately share my ideas, opinions, and solutions without fear of harsh judgment or discriminatory repercussions. As you're looking at these definitions, I'd love for you just at a high level to share which one of these safeties is the highest priority for you. Now, we know we want all of them. Just put in the chat, which one is the highest priority for you? I'll tell you, for me, it's yes, physical safety, because there's sometimes where I'm like, oh, I'll do some things that are like not as safe. You're talking to a guy who rode around the country on a scooter at one point. Psychological safety is the highest priority for me. If something feel like it's impacting my self-image, or if something is impacting the way that I show up in the world, it's much harder for me to even be the full version of who I want to be. And notice as we talk about the ones you're prioritizing, I love to see in the list that people are already being able to share just at a high level, looking at this for the first time, that they can pick things that they prioritize. Now, whenever we go in, we measure safety in organizations, as we do full action classes, we will give them numbers that represent something like this. They will see this type of experience where the green is representing a favorable score. So right now, for this last client we did, the favorable score for physical safety was 95%. And this neutral portion is representing, or this gray portion is representing a neutral score. So people who said neither agree or disagree. So then there's times where you also have people who said they strongly disagree, or they disagree that they have psychological safety in an organization. Imagine if your brain was operating like this, and then someone's going to give you feedback. Are you going to be able to receive that feedback? No. Most people will feel like they are still under threat, so it's harder for them to actually hear the feedback. So when we're talking about advancing safety in your organization, it's important that we get clear, how do we increase safety? So as y'all even listed in this chat here, what would help increase safety for you based on the one that you prioritize? We're going to give you an example to make sure you can reinforce safety for all 4 of these. But it's important that when you're talking to your feedback receiver, you find out which of these safeties is their top priority. So make sure you can speak into that filter, and absolutely you're welcome to reinforce the other ones. But sometimes it's like we can get really good feedback, but it threatens one of those 4 safeties. And if it threatens one that's most important to us, we cannot hear it. At least I know I cannot, if something is threatening my psychological safety. So we want to give you tools that can help you across all 4 of them. It's important that you really emphasize you find out what the feedback receiver's safety filter is, the one that they're prioritizing the most, and speak into that. For those who are prioritizing emotional safety, you can use supportive language and reinforce the emotional labor that it takes for them to do whatever it is that they've been doing. Because sometimes we can kind of deny that emotional labor, and they feel like that their feelings are being invalidated. So we want to make sure we can use supportive language and also reinforce the emotional labor. For those who prioritize intellectual safety, these people who really want to logically think things through, sometimes they need to analyze what went right, what went wrong. So even giving them space to share that and giving them specific examples of what you saw went well, what you saw didn't go well, and reinforce their thoughtfulness, reinforce the effort it took to think through all the logistics, even if they weren't successful, really reinforce that thoughtfulness. Psychological safety, focus on the impact that they had or the impact that they made, and reinforce their value as a contributor to your efforts, to your work, to your goals. And for physical safety, focus on the behaviors. These are folks who are like, hey, let's talk about next steps right now. Yeah, focus on the behavior and also reinforce effort. One of the saddest things that we sometimes give feedback to folks that truly just invalidates their efforts or doesn't necessarily highlight them. So they're like, okay, why should I keep trying? So it's important that if we can speak in this way and making sure our feedback, first and foremost, focus on prioritizing the feedback filter that the receiver finds most powerful, which then brings up the question, people are like, how do I find out? Why don't you just show them this recording or even show them the page in your workbook and say, hey, of these 4, which one do you think is a top priority for you? And then just like y'all did a moment ago, you said, okay, I think this one is great. And let me make sure I speak into that. And you can always tell us if it changed, or if you figured out something new about yourself, because that would make sure our feedback continues to be in alignment. And as you speak to them in these ways and you focus on supportive language, that you give specific examples, that you focus on impact, and you focus on behaviors that they can do, this is generally good feedback altogether, but it allows you to make sure you have A+ strength-based feedback if you can hit all of these. So as we talk about how you can advance safety, it's important that 2 things I'll leave you with here, and then we'll take a moment to practice some of this for those of you who want to stay after the first hour, is that asking for consent before giving feedback. I'll tell you, this will be something that can increase safety for every one of these safety filters, is asking someone, and for example, hey, can I give you a piece of feedback right now? Or I would love to share some feedback with you. When's a good time to do that? And put them in the optimal space for learning. They might get a little bit nervous. So you can give them a chance to say, it's not that bad. I just want to make sure that you're ready for it. And then the other piece is establish neutral feedback loops that give them a chance to be ready for feedback. We are going to have a conversation about this presentation on Friday. No matter how I feel it went, we're having this conversation with our team. Brian's laughing. It's like, we have to establish that because I know I got to get ready for the feedback. I'm already thinking about what I feel like didn't go well, what did go well. But on Friday, we will have a conversation about it. No matter what, I can prepare myself to be a part of that conversation. That's the one version of a neutral feedback loop. And we do that for every one of our client events that we already have in mind when the debrief or when the feedback loop is happening. And mostly for myself, this is really helpful for me to prepare and get my mind right and ready to receive feedback, as opposed to someone trying to give me feedback right after a training or something like that. When I'm not in that space for it, I get back to that sleeping bear that I mentioned earlier in the training. So it's important that we're creating these neutral feedback loops. And so as we are approaching the full hour of this, I want to make sure that y'all received your workbook and you have already this in your workbook on page 5 that you can take your feedback through, and you can use the asset frames, you can reinforce their safety filter, look at inviting alignment. And then that last piece is that you start to address the problem or challenge. You do it with the feedback giver as the protagonist. Now, the last thing I'll say before we transition into practice mode, this has just been a very high level of our strength-based feedback action class. So we focus on asset frames, aligns, and events. We did our best to give you one tool in each of these areas to best support you to be able to take action right after you leave this training. Now, the one thing that y'all have also been seeing at the bottom of almost every slide is this link that says fearsadvantage.com/resources. When you visit that page, you will see a couple of different resources, knowing that there's some of you who came here because you are already consultants with us and you wanted to learn more about how we do the work that we're doing. Some of you want our slides, which you can request in there as well. Some of you saying, hey, we're doing performance reviews or things of that nature. Kimmy, can you please help us? There's a link for you to book a call, a right fit call with us as well, to make sure that we can discover your needs and help you apply this feedback, help you facilitate one of these workshops inside of your organization as well. And some of y'all said, hey, I just want to see Kimmy speak. You can also, Brian just put that in the chat there, if you want to bring a presentation like this to your team or to your one of your communities that you help to navigate or help to elevate in this world. So that is where we will officially close out the hour portion, letting you know that you can go to this fearsadvantage.com/resources to get the slides from this presentation as well as additional resources. And that, as we close this out, I'd like to say thank you. Yeah, I know some of y'all have to roll out of here. We totally get that. Before we go into the practice piece, we are going to just make sure we say thank you. We're going to do one of my favorite ways to close out, which is called Hey Yo. And some of y'all who've come to a couple of presentations, you're like, oh man, I'm getting ready for Hey Yo. It's like, yeah, let's do it. So the way Hey Yo works is that we'll all unmute in a moment and we'll do it together. We're going to say, hey yo. All right, and we're going to take this positive energy with us. If you feel like it just kind of took a weight off your chest, you can go give that feedback that you were struggling to deliver a moment ago, and you just take that energy and say, hey, yo. All right, so we're going to do this together on the count of 3. You're welcome to unmute. It's going to get a little chaotic, but it's way better to kind of shift the energy here before we go into practice mode. All right, ready, set. Oh, sorry, 1, 2, 3. Hey, yo. Right. Well, that's one of my favorites because absolutely. Thank y'all for being here. For sure. Thank you.
Good session.
Yes, thank you for that. And before folks leave for the practice, I just want to say, what we talk about the idea that, with Zoom, we're kind of audio off, like we're misaligning that way, but look at the alignment we had with folks unmuting themselves and saying, hey, yo, and taking away that positive energy. This is what we're talking about. How can we continue to invite alignment in small ways that lead to people being more receptive to feedback and seeing it as a positive experience? That's what we're here to offer. Thank you so much for taking away some valuable tools and sharing your insights. And now we will shift gears into practice mode. So thank y'all, and bye to everyone who had to leave. So Lewis, you were waiting for a moment about sharing insights. Let's go ahead and we'll make sure we can give you a chance to share, and then we will jump into the practice of this.
Great. I promise it's totally related. In fact, I'm glad I had to wait because for me, my learning and everything you said and everything you've ever said and all your great webinars I've been a part of is, for me, signed up in this learning of my life, which is in every relationship, from the boardroom to the bedroom. I love stunning people. And I mean, in every place at work, above or below you, or clients, any relationship, okay? I like to live with true equity. Forget the legal compliant definitions of that. I mean, I don't like to feel power over, and I don't like to feel power under. I love to feel we are in this together mutually with mutual benefit. And if we're not, I don't even want to be here. That's all. Thank you.
Well, I think that I appreciate, as you summarize, I would peg that into the alignment piece and just making sure that folks feel, to me, it's we have mutual influence, we have equity, we have the inclusion. To me, there's so much alignment that I'm looking for now with the relationships I have. And then, as you mentioned, to at least for me, I know it helps us to advance together. And I think this is where we start to level the playing field in a way that invites people to actually realign with one another. If we can get through some of the difficulties and again, stop confusing misalignment for misconduct or malintent, we can start to align and be more progressive towards the world that we want to see. So that is, I appreciate you sharing that, Lewis, as you apply into your relationships. And thanks for waiting here as you're like, I know I kept on coming up. So great. I want to share with folks what we will be doing in the practice round. That way you can be clear about what we're doing in the breakout rooms. And then if you choose to stay, would ask you to stay for the rest of the time for that breakout room, in order to make sure we can have the practice and come back into the main room and share our experiences and get some fine tuning around the pieces of feedback that we want to deliver. So here we go. As you're looking again at page 5, what we'll be doing is setting up a 10-minute breakout room discussion. And we'll be doing this in pairs. So Brian is setting up the breakout rooms right now. So we'll be doing this in pairs. The first person who goes, you'll take 1 minute, introduce yourself and give context to the feedback that you're wanting to share. Then you'll take 2 minutes to deliver A+ strength-based feedback, like share the piece of feedback that you've been working on in this class. And then 2 minutes to receive feedback on your feedback. Then in terms of receiving the feedback on your feedback, the person can simply ask on a scale of 1, so you can discuss with your person in your breakout room on a scale of 1 to 10, how well is it aligned with our strength-based feedback framework? And then what is one thing you can do to increase that alignment? So I've been sharing with you an example. So Brian will actually unmute and be the person who's going to reflect back. So I'll take 1 minute to share. So introduce myself. My name is Kemi. Give context to this feedback. This was a person, Jemmy is a person that we brought in to facilitate with us. And I felt like they didn't take it as seriously as I wanted them to, or that they were underprepared and it felt unprofessional. And it's a little bit intense for me because it also is a personal relationship that's becoming professional. So I want to make sure I navigate this very smoothly so we can maintain our friendship. So if I take 2 minutes to deliver A+ strength-based feedback, I can say, here's a practice round. If Brian is Jemmy, I'm going to say, hey, Jemmy, I feel like there was misalignment with our last collaboration on that workshop. And I know you're somebody who really values being a high-level facilitator, and I appreciate all the ways you've contributed to the past things that we've done together. And so I want to really talk about alignment here and make sure we can increase our alignment around the consistency of the quality that you bring to our next presentation, as well as the way that you show up for the client on the call. Are you open to having that discussion? So that was me giving it in less than 2 minutes there. I'm just literally spitballing it here to make sure y'all see that we're going to ask you to do something similar. So Brian, you can go ahead and give feedback or discuss feedback on my feedback.
Okay, great. So Kemi, what I heard in your sharing of your feedback is that in addressing Jemmy, you acknowledge their strength as a facilitator, and so you spoke into the role that they're playing in the service that you're all functioning in together, and you also spoke to the goal of showing up on a call to serve, right, and what that might mean. And so one thing that I might, and so that's the alignment, is that this common goal of showing up to facilitate together. And so what I'm looking to hear, what I heard that was missing, is what was the safety filter that you're speaking into? What's Jemmy's safety filter? How might Jemmy want to receive additional feedback as Jemmy has been invited, and you're going to jump into the next steps?
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I was thinking on the scale of 1 to 10, I missed that I missed that piece of the safety filter. And yeah, I think that Jemmy's safety filter will most likely be psychological safety as well, which is why I was trying to reinforce it around their contributions as a facilitator. However, I know one thing I could do to increase that alignment is really speak to the value and really let them know how much value they have in my life, so that I can make sure that whatever feedback I give still reinforces
3 things, and it's say that again.
You froze for a moment. I think you
froze
right
for
a moment. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're speaking to the signal for psychological safety, which is impact, or the contribution that Jemmy's making. So contribution that you mentioned is already tied to that. So it's sort of a 2-in-1 package deal. So I'm going to give you a 9.5 on your invitation to give feedback.
I appreciate it. I would still peg it as an 8. Now we can start working on alignment. But I think one thing is to more clearly pinpoint the safety filter. And I appreciate what Brian just mentioned too. It's like a twofer, right? It doesn't have to be a formulaic. We're not asking you to do a formula, because as I'm talking to Jemmy may not be as aware of the safety filters. I believe I know the safety filter. And as I mentioned to you earlier, you can totally ask. So one thing I can do is, as I said, show Jemmy the workbook and say, hey, here are these safety filters. I'm interested to find out which one is the top priority for you. And then as they do that, I'll say, I'd love to give you feedback, and I want to make sure I reinforce this safety filter for you. So let me know how I can do that the best way. What's the best way to do that throughout this conversation and moving forward? So we're teeing you up to make this more organic. And so I appreciate they seen an organic example of Brian and I working through this. And this is what we will do as we go into the breakout rooms. We'll give you 10 minutes as the instructions shared there. And then as you are in your breakout rooms, we will encourage you all to time yourselves. We'll send you a reminder halfway through, but giving you the autonomy, because as we saw here, the organic portion of this is also really exciting. And then when we come back into the main room, we can then have a conversation about it, and then be able to help you get unstuck or get any nuances that you need to further develop your feedback. So here's a version of the instructions here in the chat. That way you can talk it through with your partner. Takeaways from this session, or questions, concerns about this feedback process?
Well, I think feedback on feedback is profound, because often we just think about feed forward, as you said earlier. So actually engaging in that process of reflection, as well as facilitating the feedback reflexively, I think is very useful in terms of making the feedback more useful, that's sort of repeated. But often we give feedback full stop, but then the feedback must be valuable to help us to move forward. So that's my key takeaway.
Yeah, I appreciate that, especially as we, ask, like, how did that land with you, or how did that resonate? Like, really getting a chance to understand what was most important about that. And I think there's also a piece here when we talk about safety filters. If we're trying to find out what folks are, which one they find most important, we can also ask, hey, what part of my feedback resonated the most with you? And sometimes they'll tell you, like, oh, I appreciate how you acknowledge my feelings, or like whatever they appreciate, whatever like resonate, is generally kind of pointing us to the safety filter they find most important as well. So thank you for that, Mark. Thank you for that sharing. Who else would like to share? takeaways from the training or insights from your practice? Is it Leanne? Is it?
Yeah, it's Leanne, and it's okay if I ask a question?
Oh, sure, go for it. Yeah, there's question, concerns, and insights, Leanne. Do it. Go for it.
So first of all, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much. The question that I have is one of the things that is a dearly held construct for me is that you give feedback as close to the event as possible. So it's as meaningful as possible. So down the road, when I'm very literate in this, I can see that I would be able to do it. But now it feels like something I need to go and kind of write out and think about and plan, which doesn't necessarily support in the moment. So help me bring those together.
Ooh, asking a great question. Now, so if you already have a process of in the moment, I'd be interested to think through what pieces of these can be applied in the moment. Like, for example, if I know, so what is your safety filter, Leanne? We'll practice this right now in the moment. Psychological. So I can say, thank you very much for seeking to apply this in a process that you know is already in motion, that you've spent quite a bit of time developing and thinking through how you can provide feedback in the moment, knowing that that is something that you said is a narrative that's very important to you, and that's like contributing to you giving good feedback thus far. I would invite you to think about how does this align with where you're currently at, and is there space in the future to and ask for people's consent and use that as a more immediate, say, hey, I would love to give you some feedback. I'm going to ask you immediately after I saw something. The consent piece is also saying, hey, if this is not the right time, can we put something on the calendar that still is immediate and can lead to a neutral feedback loop? How is that landing with you?
That makes a lot of sense. Actually, you made me think of this question when you talked about right after a workshop is not when you want feedback. And I actually have a lot of people working for me that are facilitators and trainers and those kinds of things. And I realize that now that I might be perceived as having pounced on them after the training, because I'm like, let's do it immediate. And I can tell you, I've seen in their faces sometimes where they're like, oh. And so you've given me pause to think about how they'll receive it. So thank you.
Absolutely. And sometimes if they already know it's coming, right? Like I know that if there's been, when I was being onboarded for other programs, I already knew like on the drive back from the training, we're going to talk about this. So like, even like I could prepare better for it, right? So I think there's a yes and it's like, are we communicating the expectation that regardless of how well it went, we will talk about it like 10 minutes after the training? Like that is still creating a neutral feedback loop. Are we communicating that in advance? So I would, if you're open to it, making sure that they're in alignment with that. And even maybe it's like giving them 15 minutes instead of 10, right? You know, the small things that could be like, oh yeah, that extra breather was super helpful.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leanne. Trust me, that like, I appreciate the feedback afterwards, but I also know like sometimes I'm sleeping bear mode. I'm like, yeah, I got to go hibernate before I can get some more insights. So thank you for that, Leanne. Any other questions, concerns, insights that came up as we went through this? Takeaways.
Hey, Kemi, it's Andy. Just real briefly, we kind of talked about how easy it is and the feedback, providing feedback, how easy it is to like point fingers. And just, you know, as soon as you do that, things kind of don't go well. But it's so easy to do, you know, especially with closer relationships. So some of the questions, you know, asking for consent before giving feedback, and also the asset framing is so important, and even just as important, especially maybe especially with closer relationships, someone you work really closely with or a family member, is to make sure you have that asset framing first, and then, you know, again, not point fingers, you know.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Annie, especially if we're thinking about walking up or like coming up to somebody, and like if we're already kind of stewing, we had all this time to prepare asset framing, we didn't do it. That's like on us. I mean, that is, we literally kind of ignored and blow through that. And there's times where that's why I said that if there's a feedback that you're at a 10, it's like, hey, maybe we got to take a breather, go think about this a little bit more, even get it down to a 9 might be better than a 10. And this is part of why we're trying to get folks to think through asking for consent, because if that person's not ready for the feedback, is it more about us or about them at this point? Some people are like, oh, I don't care if they don't, I need to give this feedback. It's like, all right. So again, then probably means that you think you're the protagonist. And there's ways that I know I need to release some stuff before I can give somebody feedback, because it can be super intense. And y'all haven't seen me like really upset, but there's a I could definitely get pretty intense, and it's like, all right, let me back down, because for me, the like knowing about my psychological safety, if I do something that's out of integrity with who I want to be in the world, that's going to eat me up so much more than if I, than that release of giving somebody tense feedback. So I appreciate you, Andy, as you highlighted that piece alone. Is why we started at saying, if you take away that question alone of who's the protagonist right now for the feedback, could be such a de-escalating moment that we don't point fingers. And we actually invite people to say, hey, I see you as a I had to do this actually yesterday. I was talking to someone, and I asked a question that like put them on the defensive. And I was like, oh, I can see how I wasn't seeing them as a protagonist. I thought that I was assuming their intention in this meeting. And as soon as I asked the question, I saw like the reaction they had. I was like, dang it, that's my bad. I asked a question that totally made the space unsafe for them. And I sent them an apology email this right before this training. And they were like, yeah, it definitely took me aback. And so I appreciate you following up. And I asked them if there's any residual harm or negativity, please let me know, I can clean it up. And they said there was none. Something I caught it soon enough to be able to say, yeah, I apologize for that. But it's like, as soon as I reminded myself that they are the protagonist, it was like, oh, I can literally release all the tension and give a chance to support them as a hero in their own journey.
Kimmy, I'd like to offer, what did I say? Well, I don't know, but
yeah, please.
When you said, okay, so the part about, I really love how you spoke about the person receiving the feedback as the protagonist, because instead of me viewing myself as a protagonist and almost like them as an enemy, you flip it. Because what I have to say to them, I can come off as a attack, right? If I don't do it well. And at the end of the day, the reason why I'm sharing the feedback is because I care and I would like to improve this situation. And thus, when you look at it like that, you begin to, it allows you to take a step back and say, okay. And I really appreciate the emotional, psychological
the safety filters.
Right. Thank you. I really appreciate that, because that allows you to judge how to approach, and you can also put the scenario into each of the boxes as well. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and tell me how to say your name to make sure I say it correctly.
Tafari.
What's that?
Tafari.
Tafari?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. And this is trust me, when we created just this image right here alone has been a game changer for me. Like this thing around the safety filters, and like you just talked about the approach, for one, for me to realize how I needed to receive feedback, but two, to be thinking of, hey, if this person's having a trouble, what are they missing right now? And some people, for example, in the DEI space, they're missing intellectual safety of even understanding how to navigate it. Or some people are feeling they're missing the psychological safety because they're being called and labeled different things that are not in alignment with who they see them as, or they're being misgendered. That there's so many pieces. As soon as I understood this, it was like, oh, we can actually separate this out, and more importantly, give people an opportunity to advance safety. So then people would then more likely take the feedback, but then put the feedback into action, because to even have innovation, we need psychological safety to say, hey, I can take a risk and I can do something different. So for me, it was like, oh, whoa, this is a game changer. And it's I love that you reflected around the protagonist piece again, because then I can If I know that they're the protagonist, I can ask, what do they need to be successful? Then all the finger pointing in the world, I already know is not going to help. Do I need to be firm with them? Sure. Do I need to make sure they know what I will and won't do? Absolutely. Do they need my blame, shame, and guilt? Nope. That is that how asking those two questions alone, who's the protagonist and what do they need to be successful? Game changer. It lets me show up how I can be, even working with a diversity of people and knowing that we will be very misaligned at times allows me to find those moments of alignment because I actually care about the human being that I'm connecting with versus my story about them. So thank you for that. Y'all get me fired up. All right, we got time for a couple more. We have people who haven't spoke yet. What do you got? Come on, let's get two more folks and then we'll close out.
Let's get in. I see Andy's hand.
Okay, go for it.
Oh, Andy was waving goodbye. Oh,
okay.
Brian, deliver cat out of the way.
Oh, thank you.
Cat's trying to get in there. All right, so I'm gonna ask Debbie, Kelly, or Kelly, because I know we've talked to the couple of the rest of y'all. Insights, questions, concerns.
So I just named in there, well, one, I thought the whole presentation was spot on and just very helpful and interestingly aligned with the message that I heard earlier that just talked about direct communication is a direct manifestation of love for a person. And so I heard that very saliently in here is that the reason for this is because you care about the person. You care about who they are, what they contribute to your partnership, to your organization. And that's something that's a priority for me. And again, those filters, I think we're just super spot on. Somebody earlier mentioned kind of made them synonymous with love languages. And I think that's a really a cogent way, an effective way to look at it. So just thank you so much for all of these awesome insights. Personally and professionally, I can see this being very beneficial.
I appreciate that, Kelly. And Kelly has seen me kind of navigate feedback and adjust programs, and so you've seen some things, right? And then it's interesting as we go back to the love languages. Some people literally don't want to hear that at work, and it's like, all right, let's talk about safety then. How can your team receive feedback if this is how their brain is feeling, right? Like it doesn't make sense to me. It's like if we can. Sometimes I honestly get in tears, like thinking about the amount of people who just want to feel valued at work. And as you mentioned, both you and Lewis said, the personal relationships, how many people in our lives are missing this type of language and feedback from us and would love to hear that. And so it's important that, yes, we can talk about them as love languages or safety filters. The point is, how do we figure out, how do we give communication for the feedback receiver to get it and know that they can see the value in it. The last piece I'll share about this, I keep switching to the wrong camera. Here you go. This is the camera 3. One of my mentors, Houston Kraft, said that all of our actions either signal, they say, I love you or please love me. And that was like, I still grapple with that one. I'm like, whoa. So sometimes the finger pointing is kind of saying sometimes like, I don't feel love, like, please love me. Like I need to, whatever you're doing is signaling that you don't love me. And it's like, what if we asked a different way and invited someone to say, like, if I say, hey, I don't really feel love in this example, or I don't feel safe in this example, I would love to invite more of that safety for me. Are you willing to have this kind of, are you willing to realign it? These are different models that are kind of saying the same thing. I think people are yearning and say, hey, I don't thrive on constant criticism. I don't know anybody else who does. I would rather make sure that my communication says, I love you and I love me, and we can continue to move forward together, aligned with the success that we're both looking for. That's how I want that. I've been aligning my communication. So I appreciate that you're hearing some of that message already, Kelly, and that you're evoking more of that in the space. All right, Debbie, bring us home. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I saw you there. I got you. Go for it.
Well, I just loved everything Kelly said, and I just want to bring an amen to the whole thing because, Kemi and Brian and what the whole team is achieving right here. I mean, this is really John Lennon's song, right? Imagine, where, we feel heard, we feel like we're contributing, we feel loved. And, I really, really appreciate all this groundbreaking work, all the hard work that you are doing, and all the people on the call today. We need it even more now than we did 20 months ago, right? So much has happened. So, just laying a lot of love on everyone and all of you who are change makers. I just couldn't be prouder. And you make me wish I was at the start of my career, because I would love to bring all this forward, but I know I can do it within my sphere of influence. So I just cannot thank you enough, and so proud of everybody.
Thank you for that, Debbie. I appreciate it. I was going to say, you're retired. Enjoy that, because I think some of us would be like, yeah, we'll take that and enjoy. And because the stakes in some ways are lower, your impact can be higher, right? Because there's you're not as concerned as someone who's just entering their career and be like, oh, I can't say this. It's like, no, I can really speak to and give people feedback in this way. And they're like, oh, and you just even reinforce effort just now as you were sharing there, and just really talking about all the stuff that happens behind the scenes, because a lot more of that than the average person on the call. And these are the things that I'm saying that as soon as we put this together, like, we need to just share this with people and make sure that if more people spoke or even thought in this way and focus on increasing safety, a lot of the other initiatives that we're even trying to put forward would have more trust, would have more ability to connect with what people are really needing to experience before they can commit to the changes, and knowing that change management or change in general is hard. So are we actually navigating change management in a way for people to feel safe as we progress? I don't see many organizations doing that, and which is why we're here to say, hey, please let us help your team get to where they're going safely so they can thrive on the journey. So Debbie, thank you for the opportunity to close it out that way. I appreciate all of y'all for being here. I wish I had Imagine teed up. That would be epic. That would be next level for us. We'll start getting people who can reference songs, and the music starts to come in here. But I appreciate you, Debbie, and giving us an opportunity, everyone, to add some of this goodness to your journey, and appreciate y'all taking it forward.